See, if there's one thing that I hate more than mayonnaise, is people who compose metric modulations without the sufficient musical buffer between the rhythmic perceptual twist of the two expressions of the tempo.
I know, right?
Finally, someone who gets it. Hello everyone and welcome to episode number, who cares, of Time Consuming. In this episode we'll discuss metric modulations and how to compose them like responsible adults, which sadly doesn't happen as much as I would like it to. For this one, I'll be diving into two songs from the freshly baked Sungazer album, Against the Fall of Night. And to make matters more interesting, I'll be joined by a special surprising guest that is probably not that much of a surprise because he was featured in the intro.
Hi, my name is Shawn Crowder, and I'm not a surprise.
Shawn and Sungazer are on a humongous tour right now, and I'll be opening for them for the Boston show with a duo of mine that I really like. More on that later, but for now, let's get down to business. So, a metric modulation is a rhythmic shift that happens when you change the way you group an existing set of beats or subbeats in a new manner, which results in a perceived tempo change. Yes, of course, I'll give you an example. Now, 98.4% of the time, these shifts happen on beat 1. But if you know Shawn, and if you know Sungazer, they are anything but your average 98.4% of musicians. You'll see what I mean later in the video, but for now, here's a simple metric modulation example. So here's a string of random beats. Now, if I alternate between kick and snare every, 4 subbeats, for example, we'll get this. Some might call these beats 16th notes, and the perceived tempo is this, 66 beats per minute. But if I take the same string of lifeless beats and rearrange the kick and snare to hit every 3 subbeats, for example, we'll get this. Some might call these triplets, and the perceived tempo is faster, 88 beats per minute. So if I just aggressively go from one to another, that's a metric modulation. It's a disgusting one, of course, but it's a metric modulation. A different interpretation to the same string of beats that results in a perceived tempo change. Notice I didn't make the beats go faster. I just changed the context around them by creating a consistent kick and snare pattern in a different, predictable, repeated spacing. And once you, the listener, acknowledge this new repeating pulse and you're able to trust it, as in safely predict when the next beat will arrive, you kind of surrender to it. And then you lock into that new groove I intended you to. There are many ways to achieve this, but introducing a consistent kick and snare pattern is usually a very solid option. Blah, blah, blah. Let's go listen to some real music, shall we? So the first song we'll dive into is Paydushko Horo, which is Greek for like and subscribe. It's not. This is one of my top 2 favorite songs from this album, and the groove here slaps really hard. Now yes, we are in a quintuplet feel, which isn't the most common thing on the planet, but the groove is very straightforward. This is so cool. There's Balkan lines, a strong 4/4 feel. We have 4 on the floor, so the squares are the kick drum. We have snares on the backbeats. Those yellow X's would be the snares. I mean, what's not to love here? Yo, this groove is so good. Wow.
By the way, I was listening to the song again, and I found this cool little rhythmic nugget that I didn't include in the video. If you can find it, you'll get 17 extra points. At some point during the song, Adam Neely, the bass player of this band, plays a 5/3 pattern. See if you can find it. If you can, put it in the comments.
Anyway, the perceived tempo here is 108 beats per minute. The song goes up and down, and eventually the groove turns into a 5/4 groove. So we have 5 main pulses divided as quintuplets, so 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Notice that the snare is gone, so the drive of this groove is slightly less aggressive. And then this happens. A few things happen here. The harmony changes, instrumentation changes a little bit, but most importantly, the consistent pounding dance-like kick drum stops being consistent. So the driving feel we had is immediately compromised. But this new part that feels completely different isn't super far out from what we had. I mean, the rhythmic accents here change from 5-5-5-5-5 to 4-6-4-6-5, which practically means that these two beats move one step to the right, and that's kinda it. They play that 3 times, and the 4th rep is divided slightly differently into 4-4-4-4-4-5. And as you can see, the kick drum is playing the first beat of every group, and the perceived tempo here is 135 beats per minute. Now yeah, it might be a small change on paper, but it has a big impact. And unless your comfort level with quintuplets is insanely high, I'm sure that when this section comes in, you kind of stop bobbing your head for a second. And that is perfect, because that's exactly what I meant when I said at the beginning that I don't like it when people construct metric modulations without a sufficient musical buffer. They just go on to the new tempo. I don't really like that. But this here is the musical buffer, this exact thing. Because now that you've eased out of that pounding quarter note feel, once this new section comes in, you're super attentive, alert, and curious to see where will this section go. So now both your ears and your body are in a super welcoming state for a tempo change. They hint at that new tempo during that 4th rep. I mean, you see all these 4s? They're suspiciously consistent. And indeed, soon after, the glorious backbeat comes in and we find ourselves in a new, faster feeling tempo. This backbeat, specifically in a 16th note setting, is such a rhythmic consensus that regardless of what's underneath it, I'm sure we're all moving our heads the same way. I mean, the meter almost doesn't really matter here because it feels so good. And as you can see, the snare drum pattern bulldozes over the bar line and leaks into the next reps, which is why we need more than a few cycles of this pattern till we resolve, which we never do because soon after, Shawn goes into this nasty halftime groove feel thing that exaggerates it even more. Okay, check this awesomeness out and pay close attention to where the snare drum is played in each one of these reps. They do go back to the quintuplet feel afterwards, but come on, how cool was that? This is great stuff. Before we go to the next song, there's something I want to tell you. So version 1 of this script was actually flipped. I was supposed to discuss a different song that I thought was simpler and then hand it off to Shawn for him to explain this song that we just did. But when I sent him the original script and he sent me an email back, I discovered that the simple song is, surprise, surprise, not that simple. There's some rhythmic wizardry going on there and I totally fell for it. So to break down the next song, Skronch, which is High German for leave a comment and share with your friends. Yeah, it's not. I want to give the stage to the man himself, the tuplet extraordinaire, Shawn Crowder. Take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, and don't feel too bad for hearing this wrong because we tricked you. You see, there's some very deceptive stuff happening in the beginning of this song, which is meant to mislead the listener. So it starts with this riff, which sounds something like which sounds like a nice and innocent 4/4 melody, which it is. However, the first note you're hearing is not actually beat 1. It's a pickup note into beat 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have this very misleading melody which sounds like it starts on 1, but it's actually starting on beat 4. This rhythmic illusion is further strengthened by a giant crash cymbal which comes in where you expect a crash cymbal to come in on the downbeat. But in fact, it is not the downbeat, it is also coming in on beat 4. And it's not until the groove kicks in that you finally hear the real backbeat for the very first time, which happens on this stack cymbal.
Now, pause right there. When Shawn says that this is the first time that you hear the real backbeat of the song, I understand what he means, but I'm sorry, it's way too late for me. I've already committed to hearing it in one way, and sadly there's no coming back. We're just gonna always be one beat apart. So his backbeat, beat 3, is my beat 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Confused? Me too. Now the cool thing to notice here is that creating a groove that feels very solid in two different ways, one quarter note apart, is not an easy thing. And just for that, props to you guys, Shawn and Adam, for pulling this off. How did you guys do that? How did that come about? Like, what's going on here?
We have this basic clave rhythm. Dun, gon, gon, ja, dun, and even when the groove comes in, we continue to play with this rhythmic perception by not outlining beat 1 and instead anticipate things one beat earlier. So it's going to be 1, 4, 1, 2, and 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Almost like this New Orleans kind of a feel.
Sorry for interrupting all the time, I'm just very excited. Using that New Orleans groove vibe is super smart. There's a natural accent on beat 4 in that groove, and together with the swung feel, it serves as a great foundation for this rhythmic wizardry. Maybe that's another reason why this groove is just so groovy. But just to stay on topic, this groove lends itself very well to be heard in both ways.
There was a time early on when writing this song where I could hear it both ways and I could choose to listen either way. I could kind of flip back and forth, flip a switch in my mind. Now I've heard it so many times that I can't go back. So it is what it is, and I can't really change my perception. As soon as that backbeat comes on, it's like, okay, that's where we are.
Now you might have realized that I can talk about drums and shifting grooves till we're all dead and gone. But for the sake of this video, Shawn, the metric modulation please. Go for it.
Now it's time to talk about the real math nerd stuff. So later in the song, we have a metric modulation. So we're gonna go from this swung 4/4 groove, which you could also call like a 12/8 groove, da-ga-da-da-ga-da-da-ga-da-da-ga-da-da, and then everything breaks down for a moment and we go to just the stack on 2 and 4, or on beat 3, I guess, in halftime. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And then gradually, we start hinting at something new. Now bringing out these offbeat triplets. 1, 2, 3, ba 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 ba, ka doon ta da 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 ka doon cha don't tick on tick ka don't ta. Start implying a new time feel over this whole thing. Now, the question I asked is, what if we just went there? What if instead of always having to bring it back into this other time field, what if we just go? And so what happens is that we have this weird thing superimposed on the rhythm, and that just becomes the new section. Now this is a weird metric modulation because not only are we changing tempos in a related way, but that new related pulse doesn't start on beat 1. And so we're kind of modulating this offbeat triplet thing where it's actually beat 4 in the old tempo that ends up being beat 1 in the new tempo. And that becomes our new pulse. So we have this metric modulation, but the whole thing is shifted over by 3 16th notes, or 3 triplets, by 3 notes. So in that transition, we lose a beat somewhere in there. The measure gets cut short because it's actually beat 4 of the old tempo that becomes beat 1 of the new tempo. And then when we transition back in the next section, we have an extra beat. Yeah, so this tune is a lot harder than it seems. So thanks for the invite, Yogev, and hope this clears things up.
Damn. I love Shawn's stuff. I've been following him for the longest time, and this guy really knows his shit. And as for Sungazer in general, they really push the boundaries on the rhythmic side of stuff, and I really appreciate them for that. I love their music. That's it for today. This album, Against the Fall of Night, is totally packed with rhythmic gems for us rhythm lovers. So go ahead and listen to it, and make sure to catch them on tour. Or, even better, come to their Boston show, January 16, 2025, where I'll be playing as well with one of my favorite bands ever, Shuesmo. Tickets for this show are running low, but the link is in the description. That show is going to be very, very cool. Yo, Shawn, thank you so much for participating in this episode. It was a huge honor and pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Yogev. It was a pleasure, and I hope to see you and you, the viewer, at our show in Boston. Going to be a lot of fun.
Yalla, people. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you January 16 in Boston for the show, or in the future. Whatever comes first.